winter in Charleston, Italy. And that happens all the way around the Passover, where the Jews said that they passed out of Egypt. And no documentation whatsoever, but as we got the story, we are told that the Pharaoh's army was flooded out by the Red Sea. There's no documentation nowhere in Kemet where the Pharaoh's army was flooded out by the Red Sea. But there is documentation where Ursama Atras and Timuram army is flooding out the Hittite forces at this particular period. Somebody came and copied that story and corrupted that story and the Moses story. And that this is how the Jews were expelled out of Egypt, and they said they were enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. No documentation whatsoever. The only documentation that we got, the large group of people who were in Kemet for 200 years, who held the area of Avaris, the Delta, those are the Hyksos invaders. They were here for 200 years and enslaved the Kemetic Africans in the Nile Valley for 200 years until the liberators and the emancipators of the 17th dynasty, the second Enretals, and the Kadmoses. There they started the War of Liberation, and that liberation started right here in the area of Waset. And it was Ned Pettirod Bose who expelled the Hyksos. That's the only documentation of a large group of people who were expelled from Kemet. In fact, a Jewish historian named Josephus, who lived around 37 to 100 AD, he said they took from Admos and made a Moses to give the Jewish story some kind of validity when it has no validity in documentation whatsoever. And then at the pulpit, every year during the Passover, this is where we get that chitlin dribble juice at the pulpit. Or go down Moses and old Pharaoh's land. And then we become brainwashed. Every year you're getting that story. But nowhere can you find it on the temples and monuments of Kemet. The only documentation, as you see, that here we see Ursama Atra, Rameses II, with his chariot is not being flooded out, but he's flooding out the Hittite forces. Document it. Take your pictures so you can go back and show your family and show the preacher, because if they got some evidence of this, show it to me where the Pharaoh's army was flooded out by the Red Sea. No documentation whatsoever. As I said, these temples were covered up in sand. They were only dug out in the turn of the century to make towards dollars, but not to tell the truth. So now we see that when you go to Jerusalem, the only thing they can tell you is that something used to be there. They say Solomon's temple used to be here. There's no used to be's here. We're right here, touching the wall, touching the Booksinstone, where we can see the evidence and documentation. But it's through these stories that we've been inflicted through self-hate, with the Ham story, a story that was created by the Sanhedrins, first at the Conference of Jamnia in 90 AD. We need to know about these historical accounts. This is where they created a story and said that we were cursed. Here, they were writing us out of history. And then we were taught to believe these things only because of this curse story that supposedly, in the Noah story, that Ham chuckled. Because we see that Ham chuckled at his father because he was naked, Noah. This is a biblical allegorical story. It is not real. They created the story. And it said, cursed be his offspring. That means Canaan and Ham. So we say these things because this is what's down in some of our psyche. Is that our condition is based off of the fact that we are so-called cursed. When in fact there's no documentation of that whatsoever, but by some Sanhedrins and also the contemporary Ashkenazi European Jews who control the media in America, that constantly indoctrinates us, and above all, to vilify and demonize Egypt to this very day. So when we talk about Egypt, most of the time we think of Egypt as it's been documented from the blasphemy of television, on all types of derogatory terms and movies, and the mummy and Imhotep called the evil mummy, and Charleston Heston and Yul Brynner and all these things. So we come back here to the Booksinstone as though our ancestors knew that one day we would forget the story. No one else is going to interpret that story. The European Jews are not going to come back here and interpret the story. So the only people who are going to interpret the story are the people who are going through the final emancipation. And that emancipation is of what? Our mind. And our ancestors left these books in stone. So we are the seed. We are the seed for that germination for the future generations to take place. It's not going to take place today. It's not going to take place tomorrow. But what we do today is setting down and laying down the foundation for 500 to 1,000 years ago. When America was started, when old George and all of them got together, they were planning for the future. The slave was never allowed to think for the future. If you were on the plantation and you were sitting down and the master came along, what are you doing? I'm thinking. You weren't allowed to think about what? So we weren't even allowed to think. So we have to think about our future, laying the foundation. So all of you are runaways. All of us. You got the disease, I got it.